Hello, and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast, your serving of drinks, culture, and the people who drive it. I'm Maria Yagoda, Digital Executive Editor here at Wine Enthusiast, and today we're joined by Tyler Balliet, a wine pro who has spent 20 years changing the way Millennials and Gen Z experience wine. Remember Rosé Mansion? Yeah, she started that. She's also one of the few out trans women in the wine industry. We chatted with Tyler about how her transition and hormone replacement therapy specifically has changed the way she experiences wine and revealed to her how the industry is failing to make products with women in mind. Tyler also told us her take on the Gen Z is drinking wrong hysteria, the fascinating history behind the war on sweet wine, and why this June will be an extra meaningful Pride Month for her. Listen to learn more. Well, it's so great to finally meet you. You have had a front row seat, I feel like, to the wine industry's journey over the past couple of decades, particularly with young people and millennials. And I'm curious how you see the current discourse around Gen Z playing out. You know, it was millennials are killing the wine industry, and now they're the largest wine drinking cohort in America. Now Gen Z is killing the wine industry. What do you think is going on?
Yeah, so I got started throwing events for millennials. Like I'm essentially the oldest millennial, and I built my entire career on building and creating these wine events and wine experiences for my friends. And everything is happening with Gen Z. They're saying the exact same thing about they said about millennials. Like everything that they're saying about Gen Z now, they said about millennials. And if you go back and you look into old newspapers, it'll go back to like 1910, like the 1880s. You always had these
Oh,
yeah, these older generations complaining about the young people. They don't do it like I did. They don't consume things. They don't go out. They don't have the same habits that I had. And it's like, of course not. The world changes, and I think for wine, it's particularly difficult because there's this giant disconnect between the people who make wine and the people who drink it, and it's geographical, like, the people who make wine live in the country. They live in rural parts of the US, they live in rural Australia, and they're not that well connected to people that are in cities, which is where the most of the wine is consumed. So, there's always been a disconnect, there's always gonna be a disconnect, but in the last 20 or 30 years, the internet had a dramatic change on everything in the world. I think we can all agree on that one, right? And as millennials, we were the first generation that was brought up with the internet. Like I remember getting it in our classrooms. I remember the first time I went on the internet. Gen Z doesn't remember that. They've had an iPhone
it's crazy.
since they were like 8 or 9 years old, you know? And so they're looking at the world differently. They're seeing things differently and they're buying things and drinking and hanging out differently. And wine is slow to change, partially is because it takes so long to make the products, right? And
Very true.
you're seeing a disconnect and you're seeing a shift and a change in the wine industry. And it's not going to be good for some wineries, but there's a lot that are figuring it out and making it work.
Right. And I feel like you are very attuned to what's working or what the industry where the industry is falling short. And I feel like your personal journey over your career has especially given you insights into that.
Yeah, I can say that. Like, absolutely. So, I started off working in wine when I was 25, 26 years old, and I didn't come from a winemaking family. I came from Wisconsin. Everybody drank Miller High Life. And I fell into wine like a lot of people do later in life. I guess I'm going to call 25, 26 later in life because I wasn't raised with it. And I grew up as my 20s and my 30s producing these wine events and throwing these wine festivals. And, Wine Riot, we were selling 25,000 tickets a year. And it was, yeah. And what we found was it was predominantly women that were buying the tickets. It was like 86% of women that were buying the
Wow.
tickets. And it came out to more like 70-30 by the time people showed up. But it was predominantly women, and so I was running this wine festival company, selling tickets to women. I was actually really, really good at it. Shocking, we'll figure out why later. And then after I ran Wine Riot, like, that ran between 2009 and 2016, and we sold about 150,000 tickets over the course of that run in cities all across the country. And then I launched Rosé Mansion, which was predominantly women. That was a pink wine pop-up in Midtown Manhattan, where you could swing from a giant chandelier and drink sparkling wine. You could jump out of a giant cake and celebrate with your friends, but you also got to learn about wine, and we taught people about wine, and we were not sponsored by the wine industry at all. And again, that we sold 225,000 tickets in 1 year, and that was 98% women with
Wow.
yeah, it was 98% women and about 65% women of color.
Wow.
So every single weekend, we saw 2,000 people a day on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and it was almost exclusively women, right? That's where my bread and butter is in this industry is, like, going after this demographic, and so, in the pandemic, I lost the business because people couldn't come to these large pop-ups, and I got a book deal to write Rebel School of Wine, and after about a year of writing the book, I've been working my entire life, and I've been working bajillion-hour weeks, and I got to sit in the middle of nowhere in San Luis Obispo and write a book for almost 2 years, and I finally came to terms with, like, my gender, and I finally came to terms with the fact that I'm transgender, and it took a little bit while to do something about it, and I eventually ended up doing something about it, and so I started my gender transition about 3 years ago, which means just, like, I started taking hormones.
Mm. And there were some unexpected changes that you experienced once you started taking those hormones. And you mentioned that your taste started to shift a little bit. And it's interesting when you're in wine, your palate is so important. And then having these shifts, which happens for a number of different reasons too. I've, taken medication that has changed my palate. What was that like for you? And what insights do you feel like it gave you?
Yeah, so the most fascinating thing about taking hormones, 'cause I take estrogen and I take something that blocks testosterone production, and then I started taking progesterone, and I feel like progesterone's the thing that really kicked this in,
Yeah.
but my sense of smell was it it got increased dramatically. So I can smell about 40-50% more intensely now. Yeah, it's really crazy. I read about this, but there's so much stuff on the internet, and there's not a lot of real research because the US government kinda doesn't fund it, and a lot of people don't fund it. So there's not that much real information to go off of, but I can smell as a wine professional, I spent 20 years in the wine industry as pretending to be a boy, and as soon as I started, about a year and a half into transitioning and about a year and a half into hormones, the smell started changing, and it got really intense. So now I can smell things I could never smell before. I can smell things from across the room, and my business partner, Morgan, like, we'll go places and I'll be like, "Wait, what is that smell? What is that thing?" She's like, "How did you never smell that before?" Because she can smell, like, really, really well. And so now I can smell all kinds of things, and it's more like I can just smell more intensely. I can also smell, like yeah, I can smell boys now. I can smell 'em from
Ugh.
across the room. I
Oh
can
god.
smell but it's really changed the way I, like, think about wine, right? So, like, my smell got increased dramatically. At the same time, my sensitivity to bitter flavors also shot up. So now I'm very
Really?
sensitive to bitter flavors. I was always a
Really?
little sensitive, but for my whole life, I drank black coffee, and now I cannot for the life of me drink black coffee. I have to add cream, and in some cases, I have to add sugar. This is something I've been studying a lot in wine, and this is part of the success we had with Rosé Mansion, is we had an entire room called Pursuit of Sweetness, where look, there's all of the scientific research you can look at. The food companies have known this information for 20 or 30 years, right? You are born with a certain sensitivity to bitter flavors. It's genetic. And then hormones also dramatically and significantly affect your sensitivity to bitterness. The opposite of bitter is sweet. So you end up with a lot of people gravitating towards sweet things, and we started discovering that when we were running Wine Riot, and then with the Rosé Mansion, we leaned into it, and we took all this research and we built this it looked like Candyland on the floor where you got to answer questions like, "How do you take your coffee, with cream and milk? What kind of cocktail would you like, a margarita or a martini? Do you have to cut the tags out of your shirts?" 'Cause that is an indication that you're more sensitive, right? Can you concentrate when the TV is on in a room, and could you, like, write an essay? That makes you more sensitive if you can't. And so we had this all and this is all peer-reviewed research that we just downloaded and read. And we built that into a game where you got to take this candy line journey, and based on your answers, you either got a dry, off dry, or a sweet wine. And we had 180,000 women take this, and we were right 99% of the time. So I knew, and I had been studying, and I have a lot of information on the sensitivity to bitter flavors and how it impacts wine. I didn't think that it was going to affect me because I didn't know. And also, even reading about these things and then experiencing them is a totally different ballgame. And the last thing is the impact of how emotions play a role in enjoyment of wine. Writing my book, Rebel School of Wine, I wanted to answer the question, how does our brain create the idea of flavor? Because it is an idea, right?
Right.
Flavor isn't hard science. It's, it's not just tasting chemicals, it's our brain creates an idea. So
Right.
smell works different than our other senses, and it goes through the amygdala and the hippocampus, which are responsible for memory and emotions. And it does that before it becomes conscious thought. And the idea is that that's what kept us alive, and that was an evolutionary thing. Like in the middle of the night, if you smell smoke, you don't think, geez, that's smoke. You just feel fear, and that keeps you alive.
Mhm.
But what it means is the bulk of wine tasting is smell, and it will hit your emotions in your memory before it becomes conscious. So you won't know why you like it or you don't like it. And so emotions play a dramatic role. And also memory, because emotions, if you are, and I had to read I spent like 3 months learning neuroscience to figure all this out. And so if you are stressed out, if you're in fight or flight, if you're really sad, your brain is basically like, we don't have time to eat. And smell is what makes you hungry. So it'll shut off your ability to smell. And there's,
Really?
oh yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Because smell is what makes you hungry. And so your body's just like, if we're in fight or flight, you do not have time for this.
Wow.
Boom, off. And it's not totally off, but it stops registering, right? And wine people don't take any of this into consideration. They take none of this. And I always had beef with that. But then when it actually happened to me and I have the A/B test of like, cool, well, before estrogen, it worked one way. After, it works a totally different way. And so personally, it's been an interesting experience. But professionally,
Right.
I have interesting insights that I don't know anybody else that has these.
Right. And you have a special insight into how the industry is or is not serving women, right? And where do you feel like there's the disconnect? You mentioned, geography is a big part of it. And then why do you think the wine industry is so often failing to connect with women who are kind of the biggest purchasers, if I'm not mistaken, of wine? Where's the disconnect? Like, how do you think the industry is failing to serve women and include women?
Because the industry's owned and run by men.
Yeah.
Like, that's the simple answer, right?
Yeah.
98% of wineries in California have at least one male owner, right?
Yeah.
86% of sommeliers in decision-making positions at restaurants are white men. There's no representation, and then there's these myths that have been spread, you know? America's war on sweet wine has been really interesting, and that was one of the things I wanted to address in my book, Rebel School of Wine, was why, like, I knew America hated sweet wine, and sweet is the opposite of bitter. And at Wine Riot, we built a mobile app where people could mark and review wines that they liked, and we found that sweet wines always gravitated towards the top. And I didn't know why, and I kind of initially bought into the whole wine industry myth, which is like, "Oh, well, it tastes like Coca-Cola, we're used to Coca-Cola," or it's people start off drinking sweet wine, and then when they have a more refined palate, then they'll discover dry wines. And none of that is true. None of that is true. And I wanted to prove everybody wrong, so I went and did all the research, right? And when I tried to talk to the wine industry about this, nobody will believe me. So I basically said with Rosé Mansion, you guys don't want these customers and you don't want to make the money, I will. And I went out and I built, you know, we were doing 15, $20 million a year in revenue with these customer base. I raised $3 million from a top tier venture capital firm. Unfortunately, I got the money in January 2020. It was bad timing, but these customers are out there and they want products.
Right.
The wine industry just won't sell it to them. They won't make or create the products and they won't deliver them in the way. And I'm not saying we just need to drink sweet wines, right? I look back at the cosmetics industry in like the 1950s, and in cosmetics, you had men making products for women, and they made the products that they wanted to see on women. And people bought them. Women bought them because they didn't have a choice, right? That was what was available, so they bought them. And then in the last 10 or 15 years, you started seeing something very interesting, right? You started seeing women-run companies with women founders, but most importantly, women investors. And they started making a whole cosmetics completely changed. There's entirely new product lines. Skincare is now an entire massive product line that didn't exist in the 1950s or 60s because the people that were making them weren't consuming them. And I think it's so easy for people in the wine industry to say, well, I like this, so why doesn't everybody else like this? There's this idea that taste is defined, that taste is the same for everybody. And of all the senses, this is the one that is so completely wildly different. And we don't really have a problem with that with food. When you hang out with somebody that you just met and you're like, oh my God, I hate pickles. Nobody's like,
Yeah.
oh, you're a bad person,
Right.
you
Right,
know?
there's a sense that sweet wine there's a perception that it's unserious, unsophisticated, that it's always cheaper, and then you grow up yeah, exactly, and you have a more sophisticated palate, and
But it's not just sweet wine, right? Like it's easy to say, okay, well, that's one category, and but there's versions of it. We're not one of the things that's opposite of bitter is sweet. But what we're really just talking about is a not bitter wine.
yeah.
Bitterness comes from tannins, it comes from oak, it comes from those like really intense red wines that are like oak date for a very long time. The kind of wines that if you look at all the people or a lot of the people that are like really struggling in wine right now, they're just making the same wines they made in the 90s and the early 2000s. These heavy extraction, like some of them are like really intensely flavored, or like and kind of be fruity, but sweet's one category, but there's also lack of bitter.
Mm.
You see that with white wines, rosés.
Yeah, what would be an example of lack of bitter that was, like, beyond just sweet?
Okay, so in a perfect example of this, my friend Shauna Rosenblum is now the winemaker at Ridge. She's making all the wines at Lytton Springs. She makes 50, 60 different wines because she's always a maniac and she's crazy. And like I love her to death. And she took over the role, I think a couple of years ago, and they kind of just let her go. They're just like, just be an artist and just make wine. And she noticed that Ridge made a lot of red wines and they didn't really make that many white wines, but they had access to all these really cool Rhone grapes. So she started making these one off, Grenache Blancs and whatnot. And they were selling in the tasting room. And the tasting room was also predominantly women. And they ended up bundling it into a club unofficially. And it wasn't on the website. It kind of technically didn't exist. And before they knew it, they had 400 members just from this word of mouth. Let's just talk and kind of bundle this. And when they officially made it a club, it has been just shooting up. It's the White Wine Club at Ridge. And they're making their dry wines, right? They ferment them mostly dry, but you have these grapes that they're more fruity. And because they're white, they don't have a lot of tannins, so they're not really bitter. And they cannot keep up with demand for this White Wine Club. And it's the perfect example of put a woman in charge, let her just run with it, let her work with the other women in the business, and they're selling these clubs to women, right? And so in an era of everybody saying that their clubs are decreasing and going away, I'm seeing rocketing sales when at least in these like, instances where you just stop doing the same thing you were doing before and you start doing something different and you start trying to understand who is your audience and what do they actually want.
Right, and I feel like wine in particular I mean, you look at other industries evolve as tastes change or the climate changes or, demand changes, but it seems like it's slower on the wine industry's part, and I feel like part of that is it's so rooted in tradition, right, and how things have been done and are done, and prestige, maybe more so than other industries, but I'm curious beyond that's such a great example. Have you seen another success story like that where someone's doing something kind of differently and it's really paying off?
Yeah, I was just in Oregon and I visited Lois Cho at Cho Wines, and they have a really amazing story. Her and her husband, they're Korean Americans, and they just YOLO'd this idea that they were going to open a winery, and her husband went and, like, trained with some of the best winemakers in Oregon, and they started making some wines, but they really started leveraging the Korean American community because nobody was making wine for them, right? And it doesn't have to taste different, it doesn't have to be different, but they started getting a Korean barbecue truck that came out, and they started doing these, tasting events with their wines and their food and just having fun, and obviously anybody's welcome, but putting that on Instagram and making reels that, "Hey, this is our community. This is who we're making this for. Come out." And the amount of support is insane. They now built a beautiful, gorgeous winery. You can join the wine club, but, like, they can't keep up with production. It is really, really crazy because they weren't making the same wine as everybody else before. So I was just having this conversation with a winemaker friend of mine today about how in my career, what I saw 20 years ago was 10% of the market represents like wine hobbyists. These are wine professionals. These are wine hobbyists. These are people that like really, really care about wine. And yeah, they buy the most wine out of anybody by far. But you have the other 90% of the market, people that just drink wine and they buy it and they don't buy as much and they're not going to like nerd out. They don't know all the stuff. But that 90% is completely and totally ignored by the wine industry. It's just categorically ignored. They built this wall around them, right? Oh, you have to learn these words before we'll sell you the wine, or you can't enjoy wine. The wine industry has been pushing away women, people of color, and queer people for 20 years, and now they're crying that they can't get them. And it's like, well, you actually can, just they're not coming to you, and they never were, like in the 90s and the 2000s, you saw tremendous growth. Also, for the record, between 1990 and today, one winery a day has opened in California alone. One winery a day.
Wow.
So we're seeing exceeding massive growth. And I have another winemaker friend that I'm not going to name, but he's in Paso Robles. And the first time we were hanging out, he was just like, "See that winery over there? It's called like B&H Cellars, or that one's like J&J Cellars, or that one's like whatever. Generic name, named it after the family. The family dog is on the website, and they're making the same wine that everybody else is making, And at the end of the day, wine is a business. Who is your customer? You need to know who your customer is. And they might have customers, but I think that a lot of the wineries that get started, they really just truly don't know who their customers are, and they don't know who they're making their products for. And they're kinda just hoping people find them.
Right, and you do have to have that curiosity and interest as to who your customers are, right? That's something that's really hard to coach. It's like, you have to kinda care about who's drinking your wine and be interested and curious about their complexity as individuals, right? And that's hard to teach.
Yeah, but I come from entrepreneurship world, right? I come from the world of, like, pitching venture capital firms and pitching, like, people that They're they're not messing around with this. You
Mm.
don't have to kinda know who your customer is. You have to laser focus and know exactly who they are. You have to know what time they go to bed. You have to know, I'm not saying, like, if you creepy, but, like, you make these profiles, and you make these profiles of people, and you make up people, right? Like, I have 3 when I wrote my book, I wrote 3 personas based on people I knew, and but I kind of put them together, and when I was writing for them. I was writing for those 3 people, and when you make products, you have to be like, "What would Jane like? What would Sam like? Would they like this? If no, then don't make it," you know? And there's time for experimentation and there's time to play around, but you need to absolutely, if you want to have a successful business, which is I think what the issue is here, you have to laser focus on who your customer is. And I went to speak at the Direct to Consumer Wine Symposium earlier this year, and I get this talk about like building communities and like how do you, instead of building communities, really, how do you leverage existing ones? And Lois Cho is a perfect example, right? She didn't create the community of Korean Americans. She just tapped into it. And I kept getting these questions being like, who's your community? Like, who's a community you could get into? Who's a community you could tap into? People are like cab drinkers. I'm like, that's like wine hobbyists are not the community. It's oversaturated. How do you fish where the fishes are, but there's no other fishermen, right? And That's what I've been doing my entire career. I've been going after the people that nobody else wants to talk to, that the wine industry refuses to talk to. And they do refuse because they create this whole language around it and this whole style of talking and this jargon. And you have to learn before you can buy our products. That's fine. That works for a lot of brands. That works for fine lifestyle brands. That works for super high end, you know, fashion brands and stuff, but doesn't work for everybody, you know?
You can't, like, blame consumers for not wanting your product. I see a lot of willfulness. It's the consumer's fault, it's Gen Z's fault because of XYZ moral problem, or, rather than a looking inward, which feels like an existential necessity right now.
Yes, but I want to have a huge caveat to this, a big asterisk, right? Which is that it's not the winery's fault. Okay. That's the problem, right? But it's not their fault. They're not in a position to necessarily fix this in an easy way. And what I really see as the issue is how, by necessity, the wine industry has outsourced its customer acquisition, its customer engagement to restaurants and sommeliers and people that work in that field, right? Because the wineries, especially if you're in France, you're in Australia, they leverage the distributors leverage the restaurants, and the restaurants are the ones that spend the most amount of time with the consumer. Wine stores, yeah, that's where the bulk of wine is sold, but they don't spend that much time with the consumer. The place that people are talking the most about wine is at restaurants and wine bars and things like that, right? And the issue is, and I know, don't hate me for saying this is just a fact, but sommeliers are not in the wine industry, right? They are in the restaurant industry. They are not paid by the wine industry. They have no financial stake in the success of the wine industry as a whole. They're paid for by, you know, the the restaurants. And that doesn't mean that they can't be a friend of the wineries, but when push comes to shove, who are they going to support? They have to support who pays their rent, which is the restaurant. And in so many cases, like the restaurants are hurting too. So the wine industry doesn't have any access to talk to the consumer in any way. They outsource this because it worked for a lot of years. But then things changed. We saw a giant increase in wine in restaurants. I'm old enough to remember that it was difficult to find a wine by the glass program in the city of Boston. There's only a few places that even sold wine by the glass, you know? Like, that was 20 years ago. Like, in college, like, none of the college bars even sold wine, even cheap wine. So, this whole, you can go to a restaurant and a bar and order a glass of wine is pretty new, you know? And the rise of educated wine-educated people in restaurants is very new, and, living in New York City, I've met so many soms that have never even been to California, you know?
Yeah.
And the US wine industry is just not in control of the consumer, they're not in control of the message, and it's I think that's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. It's like how the Psalms are really the access point, and in terms of their motivations for selling different wines, it's they work for restaurants, and that is a disconnect. I guess switching gears slightly to your experience, what has it been like for you now as a trans woman in the industry, one of few visible trans women in the industry? I guess I'm just curious what that's been like for you.
Yeah. So, again, I spent 20 years in the wine industry pretending to be a straight boy, right? I wasn't very good at it, but I was pretending. And having the shift and the change is interesting, but I think, having spent 20 years thinking I'm like a straight cis boy and then going to be a woman and specifically like a trans woman, the issue that I have is that I can't escape the fact that I'm transgender, right? I have trans friends that work in corporate jobs, like they're corporate executives and whatnot, and they transitioned 5, 6 years ago, and their jobs have no idea, right? They just don't know. And if you Google me my whole life, you're gonna see me on Good Morning America with a beard talking about wine. And that's not something I'm ashamed of, and I'm so incredibly proud to be a trans woman. But I think having that in the industry is that was the thing that scared me the most. Is I was like, how I'm never gonna be able to hide. Like I don't want to give up everything I've done for the last 20 years. I have quite the career. Like wine enthusiast, you put me on the cover back in 2013, right? Like I've done a lot of things that I don't want to ever not be able to talk about, and then to having transition. So it just makes me very visible. And I was really, really, really nervous. I was so nervous because like my book came out right, like I started transitioning while writing my book, and I knew that it was going to be a big, I knew they were going to collide. There's a clunky awkward phase that you go through, and I knew that the clunky awkward phase was going to match up with my book launch, and I didn't like that. But I got through it. And when I got nominated for a James Beard Award is like kind of when like I hadn't really publicly posted I'm transitioning or any of this stuff. And so I just kind of didn't post for a while and then posted, oh my God, I got nominated for a James Beard Award in a dress and heels and like confetti. And the response I got was really, really incredible. Like I just really didn't expect it. Like women have been really outstanding, but everybody I know in the wine industry, like even people in like the rural places and whatever, have been so sweet and so understanding and so excited too for me. And like I was just speaking at the women for I got invited to speak at the Women for Wine Science conference. Women for Wine Science is the oldest like women's like wine organization in the country, and they gave me a lifetime achievement award. And it's I was worried, but the wine industry is super chill, you know? And so far it's been everyone's been really, really great, and the biggest feedback I get is that everyone's like, "Oh, you're just, like, way more Tyler now. You're just, like, 100% Tyler, and we could tell that you were holding back before." And so, I think that's been really great, and it's opened up opportunities that I didn't see before, so where I was worried, this industry is really wonderful, and even in the rural places, like, I met these older women that were like, "Come to rural Texas, and you gotta see all the grapes and all the history." So I'm gonna go to rural Texas and hang out with these women. So it's been really great,
Oh, I love to hear that.
right?
That's beautiful. And I'm curious also, is there a specific wine that like totally changed for you after the change? I mean, obviously, probably a bunch of things have changed subtly, but like, did you have a favorite wine that you now detest?
Um, I always taste it all over the place. Like, I rarely drink the same wine 2 or 3 times, right? My favorite wines are from all over. I like wines with a story. I have wines from, I think, like, 14 different states in my apartment right now. Like,
Wow.
I'm a big fan of regional wine, so I would say the way I it's not a specific wine, but it's the way I drink it now. I really need a mood. Like, I need some romance. I need some excitement. Like, if I'm opening a nice bottle of wine, I drink a lot of wines that my friends make, right? Because like, it makes me think of them and it makes me happy, and I opened a couple bottles when I was having some friends over, and, like, I was hosting, and I was in the middle of everything, and I kinda drank these, and I was like, "I don't remember taking them." And then when my friends left, there was some left, and I drank it, I was like, "This is incredible." So, yeah, you gotta romance me now, I guess.
Right. And I guess, are you saying it's also maybe more occasion based in terms of like what the vibe or mood or occasion is?
To enjoy it, yeah, I think so, but I'm open to anything, like, I live in New York, I love going to art galleries, and they just pour you cheap wine in a plastic cup, but that's really fun, and I like that, and I think I get more out of it now. But if I'm opening a nice bottle of wine, like, I'm like, "Okay, cool, we're gonna put on some music, we're gonna, like, have some snacks, I wanna talk about something that's really fun," in order to truly enjoy it. Like, as a professional, I can still taste I can smell better now, so I can taste better. But, if I need to just, like, put on my blinders and just be a professional taste, I can always do that. That never went away. That didn't really change that much other than I can smell more. But, also colors got brighter. That's crazy.
Really?
Yeah, like, a little bit.
Wow.
Like, the saturation went up, so I can see the wine better. But, no, I would just say that, like, I didn't my flavors didn't shift that much. I can still drink the dry wines. I just need a little I need food now, and I didn't love the super, super dry ones before, like the super tannic ones, but yeah, I think I can enjoy wine more now. It's better when it all comes together. It's more exciting and I have more fun.
Love that. And that's why it strikes me as odd hearing, all of this extra sensitivity that you now have. And it's like, how come the industry is so male dominated if potentially women have more of the skills and senses you might need to be excellent at this?
I researched this for my book. I have an answer. So America's war on sweet wine. So it started basically after Prohibition ended in 1933. 13 years of prohibition meant anybody with any winemaking skills left. They were gone. They left the country. And so it wasn't just the fact that we couldn't make alcohol and the wineries went away. It was the fact that we lost skill. We lost all the labor and anybody who knew what to do. So we had to re-import it. And Andrei Checheskov, I can never pronounce his name. I feel so bad. Um, he was brought to California and what he said is like, I need to rebuild the talent. I need to rebuild the skill. And that's what he really focused on because he wanted to make California a world-class wine region and he succeeded, right? We all know that. But what they did back then is they needed to separate the low quality wines that were being made because you had these wineries in California that were putting wines in literal oil tank train cars and shipping them to the East Coast, right? So they had to be sweet. They were like full of alcohol. They were bad, cheap, sweet wine. And that was what dominated. So in New York, in Chicago, what you had was like the restaurants, we have European wines. And then after World War II, you had all these Americans that came back from Europe from the war with this taste for European wine. So they knew what these tasted like. And so Andre was like, we need to make these wines. We need to make dry wines. And so how they started separating it, and it was totally benign back then, was sweet wines were cheap and crappy, dry wines were high quality. And that was true. Back then, that was true. So they needed to tell the consumers something and they needed an easy marketing campaign. So sweet wines, bad, dry wines, good. And that was the war. And they won it exactly 50 years ago this week. The Judgment of Paris happened, and the California wines beat the French wines. And it was proof that California could make world class wines. They won the war right? But the language didn't stop because at this point, you're now going on 50, 60 years of sweet wine bad, dry wine good. And the new crop of wine people that were coming up didn't know why. They didn't know why sweet wine's bad, dry wine's good, because they're too far distance from it. Whereas in the 70s, they knew why, and they didn't hate sweet wines. They just that was words that they used to differentiate it, and they just kept pushing forward on this war on sweet wine, and they've continued and continued. What I think they don't really know is it's not a war on sweet wine anymore. It's a war on women. It's a war on people of color, and because it's just they're telling everybody that they're wrong, that they shouldn't drink these things, and they don't even know why they're doing it, you
Right.
know? And so they're pushing away consumers.
Oh my gosh, that is so interesting. I do not see people talking about that. That is a fascinating history. Because I just have always accepted, oh, there's this perception, but had no idea why. I've always had a sense in my bones that it was sort of sexist, that sweet wine is considered unsophisticated and but couldn't really articulate or understand why, and that is
Yeah, it didn't start out that way. It started out as a
right.
quality thing, and it was well understood, and it's still thought to be a quality difference, but it isn't anymore, and what it ended up becoming was this just pushing away consumers. But again, because the boomers and the baby boomers were drinking so much wine and they were just being reintroduced to it. Like, I got into wine because I went back to Wisconsin, like, after I graduated college, and my entire family was drinking wine. I was like, "What is happening here? This is like you've been Miller High Life forever," except my aunt who drinks Miller Lite, and they all switched to wine, and I was like, that's why I was like, "I'm getting into wine." Like, this is a cultural shift that's happening amongst the baby boomers, and so you had such this incredible growth with baby boomers that who cares if they pushed away women? Wine sales went up every single year regardless, and ever since the 60 Minutes piece, the French wine paradox. So ever since the French wine paradox and 60 Minutes came out, I think in 1992, wine sales in America have been going up every single year until like 2 years ago. So they've just been steadily increasing. So a winery, if they do nothing in marketing, their wine sales are gonna go up next year, right? There was just incredible growth, and that was due to a cultural shift and a cultural change. I gave a talk about how that's like computer industry, right? In the 1990s, like I'm old enough to remember going to Best Buy in 1996 and how they marketed computers. And it was like, it's a 46 processor with a 28 baud modem and 16 megabyte hard drive. Do you want it? And nobody understood the computer jargon, but they bought computers anyways, not because Best Buy was good at marketing, but because the culture was changing. And then you had Steve Jobs come along and say, it's an iMac. You can watch movies and call your friends. And everyone's just like, shut up and take my money. Right. But he got rid of the jargon and it was still there if you want to look for it, but he just removed the jargon, the industry jargon. Like computers was using the same language that engineers use to talk to each other. And they just turned it into marketing copy, but that never works. It's never worked ever. And that's what the wine industry is doing now. And they've been using this and saying, well, but sales have been going up, but like they're not. Sales weren't going up because you were good at this. Sales are going up because there was a cultural change. There was a cultural shift in America, and that caused sales to go up. And the proof is that they weren't able to do anything when the sales started going down. They weren't able to pull levers and shift that.
That's fascinating. And so we're kind of going through some of those growing pains, right? The industry is going through that cultural shift right now. And I guess in the next few years, what do you think is happening and gonna happen? Do you think the industry is pivoting enough to keep this whole thing going?
The wine industry is not just one thing, and I
Yeah.
think that that's what makes it difficult. I am most closely connected to the wine producers in America, particularly California and Oregon and Washington. And so I'm most concerned about them, right? And they're seeing so many different shifts and changes all at once. It's really, really difficult. Wholesalers have just dropped them. Like in New York,
Yeah.
like find a California centric wine list. I dare you. Like I wish I could. Like, it's all France, 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 and a big part of that is because France spends $100 million a year on marketing and PR. They spend $100 million a year on marketing and PR, right? Every 10 years, they pass a $1 billion budget for this. With Wine Riot, like, I lived off that money for a long time, the EU money, like, I lived off that. Like, that's how I paid my rent, is, like, the EU regions would come to us, we would build them booths, and, so when prohibition ended, the federal government said the deal was like, we'll let you have alcohol, but there won't ever be a single dollar of federal money that ever goes to supporting alcohol. And so the US government spends $0, and that's an issue. And if you look at the Got Milk campaign, right? The Got Milk campaign in the 90s and early 2000s, they had every single celebrity ever. And milk sales were going down, and I'm from Wisconsin, so like I know, right? Um, And so milk sales were going down and it didn't that campaign didn't make stop them from going down. It just stopped them from going down as much. But they were in a unique position where you had all of these farmers, kind of like wine, where you have like thousands of small wineries, right? And they had a couple like distributors, and those distributors said, X percentage of this is going to this campaign. And if you don't like it, we won't buy your milk. Right. So everybody had to pay in. It was a forced pay in. And it really kept the industry alive, like it's a huge success. What is wine? If wine has the ability to keep going, the market share is it could be significantly more. The amount of money people are spending on wine right now is actually higher than it was last year. It was higher than it was the year before. The amount of money people are spending is going up. It's not going to the California wineries, and the federal government's not gonna come in and save them. Banding together and pooling resources is the only thing that will, but it's really hard to do that when you don't have to. Like, how do you get the big players in this, right? And you have the regions that kind of do it, but you have so many different regions that they don't have that big of a budget. Like, there just needs to be a Got Milk campaign for wine, hard stop.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I can't watch 1 minute of television without 5 DraftKings commercials. I can't watch 2 seconds of sports without and the live odds. So that's a whole separate thing.
The profit margins on casinos is really good, you know?
Yeah. Oh my god.
And wine doesn't have a good profit margin, and that's part of the issue too, is, like, there isn't a lot of money in it, right? You know, like, what, like, a glass of or, like, a bottle of vodka, the vodka costs less money than the glass bottle, you know, and wine isn't that thing. Wine is an agricultural product. It only comes out once a year. It's a finite amount. It's I'm not saying I have solutions to the problem. I'm just saying that, like, it's it's complicated, and you have the banks that are pulling funding from a lot of these wineries. You have insurance companies that are no longer insuring the farmland and, like, the agriculture. It's it's really, really tough when you don't have an organization like the French government that can just come in and fund it, right? Like, we don't have that. And the state of California realizes that there's tourism and they throw money at it, right? But without coming together and having a national campaign that's like, "This is wine," you know, then you're leaving it up to the kid at the wine bar to convince everybody that they should drink more wine, and I'm not exactly sure that that's the best plan, and also, it's not their job. The job of a sommelier is not to be an ambassador for wine, you know,
Agreed. It's too much to ask of that kid.
right? Also, the French government's gonna, like, spend a lot of money convincing them that the wines in France are the best.
Right. I mean, and elsewhere in Europe, you see wine being treated as this precious agricultural product, a cultural product that is so tied to national tradition, which you don't really see so much here. And that could also be part of the problem. But
That's
yes,
part of the problem. I mean, wine isn't even regulated by the Department of Agriculture. It's regulated by the Department of Treasury, because they can tax it. Yeah, the TTB is in the Department of Treasury, so that's who regulates grapes being grown in Napa Valley. That's who regulates the wine regions and all that. It's the Department of Treasury. And that was all based on prohibition, like, because they're like, "This is a thing, we're gonna tax it." It was actually FDR, because FDR had just gotten elected right before prohibition ended, and he wanted to create a regional system of wine like the US. They spent money on it. They actually built sample wineries where they would build schools and they would build government-owned test wineries in different regions around the US so they could learn which grapes grew best and then train people in that area to grow them because they knew how much it stimulated the economy. They knew how much local products meant. And, France uses wine as this symbol of, like, French wine products are or all French products are high quality, you know? Like, if you look at the big auction houses like Sotheby's and whatnot, like, they know that if somebody comes to them and wants to sell $2,000,000 worth of wine, they probably have $200,000,000 worth of art. They're not in it for the wine, they're in it for the art, right? And so France isn't in it for the wine, but they know that having everybody say French champagne is a celebration means French cheeses sell more. It means French cars sell more. It means French products are thought of as better, right? And so that's why the French government invests in it.
mm, so yeah, a rising tide. There's an expression there that is relevant.
Yeah, rising tide lifts all boats,
Yes, yes, yes.
right?
Um, well, thank you so much. I could talk to you actually for 10 hours.
Yeah, I could talk for 10 hours too, believe it or not.
Have so much information in there. I love it and so appreciate your time and sharing all of this with us. I guess to wrap it all up, June is Pride Month. What are you feeling hopeful about in terms of the wine industry and the beverage industry at large, connecting with and embracing LGBTQ plus communities? We're living at a very scary, frightening time, and I'm gonna go off on my little thing. I mean, just a lot of cowardice, a lot of bigger companies backing out of pride celebrations. I have found it in my little space, the drinks community, to be so welcoming and inclusive, and I'm wondering what you're looking forward to about June, and Pride, if anything.
Yeah, no, I love this month now. Like I said, I'm fairly new here, but I think what really makes me excited is every week or two, I get a DM on Instagram from somebody who is like, I'm studying wine, I'm non binary, or like I'm transgender, and like seeing your content and seeing you, you know, talking and doing this just like gives me that's what keeps me going. Like, I getting those messages, and I get so many of them now, and I spent 20 years too scared to come out. I spent 20 years pretending to be something I wasn't because I was scared to come out because I didn't think I could cut it in this industry. I didn't think I would be accepted, and you will be, and you are, and you got me on your side, and I'm fighting for everybody, and it's a really great industry of people that care, like, nobody's in wine to make money, like, none of us we could all go some to another industry and make money, but we love it here, and we love the people, and I'm here because I love the people, and so if anybody's out there that's scared or nervous, like, send me a DM, message me, and it's gonna be okay, and we're gonna change the wine industry, And if anybody wants to launch a Got Milk campaign for wine and wants a trans wine expert. Like, I think I'm the girl for the job.
Yes. I think this needs to happen. We're gonna start a movement when this episode drops, it's gonna I don't know, I've just loved this conversation, and I'm just so appreciative of your time and perspective and energy. It's so refreshing, honestly, because I think it is very easy to fall into the doom and gloom, and I certainly do being on my phone all the time, but your energy is so infectious and precious that I just feel very lucky that I got to share it with you this
Oh,
afternoon.
thank you. I have nothing but hope and optimism. It's gonna be bumpy, it's gonna be rough, but we're gonna get through it.
I love that. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Tyler. Do you think the wine industry is making enough products for women? We'd love to know. You can email us your comments and questions at podcast@wineenthusiast.com. Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to your favorite shows. You can also go to wineenthusiast.com/podcast for more episodes and transcripts. I'm Maria Yagoda. Thanks for listening.